All right, what's going on, everybody? My name is William Grazione. I am the owner of The Educated Dieter, your health and fat loss strategist. And we're going to kick this one off with a live Q&A directly from the questions I have pulled up right here on my phone. Now, I've been in this game for 15 years, and a lot of you guys have consistently asked me a myriad of different questions. So obviously, we keep a running list of all those questions so that we can provide you guys with very valuable content to help you in your health and fat loss journey. So with that being said, let's go ahead, let's dive right on into question number one. And question number one is, what are some ways to optimize male health, specifically natural testosterone production? Now, if you're anything like me and you try your best to optimize your natural testosterone function, specifically either during a fat loss phase or during a muscle building phase in the off season, ideally you would want to make sure you have to address where you are when you start. So with that being said, what I mean by that is, where's your natural testosterone level at before you start a fat loss phase, and then where is it at the end of the fat loss phase? So you don't know unless you check, and you can't guess. You want to test, you don't want to guess. So I know specifically that my testosterone level before I start a fat loss phase is somewhere between the range of 750 and 850. But what I'm seeing a lot of is guys that are starting a bodybuilding contest preparation or a fat loss phase or a photo shoot, just trying to get lean for the summer, any of those specific goals, and they're not checking where their T levels are in the beginning. So then they're getting to the end of this fat loss phase, and most of them are beginning to feel extremely tired, very fatigued, lethargic, low libido, their sex drive is gone, even some men experiencing erectile dysfunction. And obviously, as a man, that's something that we do not want. So I highly recommend you check your testosterone before you dive into a fat loss phase, because you don't know what type of metabolic adaptations you're going to be getting yourself into. And to talk to you guys about a case study specifically, I'm working with a client right now. He reached out to me about 8 to 10 weeks ago, and his testosterone was a 150. Now, interestingly enough, this guy was athletically lean. So you take a look at his pictures and you'd be like, dude, he looks good. But internally, he wasn't healthy. And his side effects were, I have fatigue, I'm not really recovering from training very well, I'm in a position where I'm not sleeping really well, and I don't feel like I'm making the gains that I should be making in my off season. So what I went ahead and did was I actually pulled everything back. I'm like, brother, look, you're stressed out. We need to take some time to actually repair your testosterone levels, because again, he was in that 150 range. Now, it's really cool, but we're only 8 weeks into our protocol, and his testosterone levels are already back up over 300. So we've doubled them in about 2 months. Now, the thing you have to be mindful of as a natural bodybuilder or a natural guy wanting to get his testosterone levels up is simply to understand you can't floor the gas on a Ferrari for 12 months in a row. It's eventually going to break down. So what you essentially need to do is make sure that you have seasons where you're trying to push your physiology to gain those adaptations, the bodybuilding adaptations, the getting lean adaptations. But then you also have to have a season of your body where you are focused on trying to recover your hormonal profile, to get those calories back up, to improve that quality of sleep, to get the supplements in place that are going to help you get your testosterone back to baseline, or where it was before you started the fat loss phase. So those are 3 things that you could implement immediately if you're somebody that's dealing with low testosterone right now, maybe because you're living a life that may be just simply too lean for you, or you've accumulated too much stress on your body. And question number 2 is, hey Coach Will, how important is testosterone health for muscle building and losing body fat? And what should be an ideal range for a natural male 30 to 40 years old? Now, your testosterone range completely depends on you and your specific physiology. There are some men that were young alphas and they're 1,000 plus naturally. There's also some men that no matter what they did with their health, they never really got up over 500. Now, you may be able to categorize these men as a guy who's always been able to build muscle naturally. He's big, he's dense, he's strong, full beard, deep voice, sex drive is crazy, all that stuff. But then you also have some guys that maybe never were able to build a beard, maybe they're never able to build muscle, maybe they've even been somewhat skinny fat like their entire life. Those are things you want to look for, because ideally what you're trying to find is what's optimal for you. You can't just assess an individual's testosterone and say what's ideal for me, because truthfully we have no idea. But what I would say is anywhere between like a 600-700 and sometimes even up to a 700-900, maybe for a more alpha male that's never had a hard time trying to build muscle. So that would be where I would say a good range would be, where you shouldn't have any negative side effects. But once again, if you're feeling like you have low testosterone, questions to ask yourself are, do I have energy? Do I have drive? Can I build muscle? Can I lose body fat with the proper dietary approach? And then also, if I'm looking at blood work, where are my levels at? Okay. You'd also want to ask yourself, do I feel like I have a good level of libido? Do I want to have sex with my girlfriend or my wife or whatever it is? And those questions are important to ask, because then you could identify whether or not you may have low testosterone. But if you're somebody that's fatigued, tired and wired, not sleeping well, consuming too much caffeine, over dieting, treating your body like crap because you have a lifestyle disease, I'd strongly encourage you find a solution to this problem so we can get those natural testosterone levels back up. So once again, in closing, your testosterone level has all to do with you, and it is not a comparison game between you and somebody else. Question number 3 is, can you describe the role that dietary fats play on our ability to produce testosterone and its correlation to cholesterol? You see, a lot of people don't understand that cholesterol is actually the king of the hormonal cascade. So without healthy cholesterol levels, you cannot produce healthy hormones. So what I typically recommend is we like to see cholesterol, specifically total cholesterol and LDL cholesterol, at the higher end of the range. We don't want to see them over, and we surely don't want to see them low, but we do want to see them in the higher end of that range to make sure that cholesterol is sending signals throughout the hormonal cascade so that you can make sure you are producing hormones properly. So where does dietary fat even come into this? Dietary fat controls your endocrine system and your hormonal profile. So when you consume healthy dietary fats, things like almonds, nut butters, avocado, olive oil, steak, whole eggs, and those types of foods, those send a signal to upregulate or control cholesterol. Based off of those dietary fats that are coming in, we can either improve cholesterol or decrease cholesterol, improve our hormonal profile or decrease our hormonal profile. And this is why so many people that have a background history of dieting or bodybuilding competition preparation end up in a position where they have low sex hormones. It's because they're on low-fat diets and thus lower cholesterol, and that sends a negative signal down the entire cascade. So think about it. If I burn a tree down, eventually the roots are going to die too. It's the same exact thing when we're talking about how to produce hormones. You have to eat your fats. For women, I'd recommend not going anywhere below maybe 40, 45, 50, sometimes even 55 grams of fat if you may be more sensitive and you want to keep your cycle during fat loss. For men, I recommend anywhere between maybe 60, 65, or even 70 grams of fat consistently on a daily basis, even in fat loss, so we can basically make sure that your testosterone stays as healthy as it can for as long as it can, even if you have goals of trying to get shredded. Question number 4. Hey Coach Will, when you're setting up a fat loss diet for a client, what are the top 3 considerations you're looking for to make sure they see success? Well, if this individual is ready to go into a fat loss phase, there's 3 things that I would highly recommend. Number 1 is make sure that these clients are in a calorie deficit. Now, I typically don't recommend taking a bunch of calories away from fats or proteins, but I do recommend taking an immediate bulk of calories away from carbohydrate to use that as the calorie restrictive number. So think about, they're eating at maintenance, you drop some of those calories down from the maintenance, now they're in a deficit. Run that for about 5 to 7 days, maybe give them 1 high carb day per week, jack those numbers back up to what their theoretical maintenance level is at that time. So if it's a woman and maybe you take her from 200 grams of carbs down to about 120, on the high carb day, you'd want to jack those numbers back up to about 200 grams of carbs or whatever you think her maintenance level is, to give her metabolism a little bit of spike to help with some of that stress management and to refill muscle glycogen. After that, you'd repeat that carb cycle until it maybe no longer works, or you find yourself in a place as a coach where you have to adjust the protocol, which just means tinkering the numbers just a little bit to keep the fat loss moving forward. Now, the leaner somebody gets, the less you should diet them. Here's what I mean. You can start them off with maybe 1 high carb day per week, but then as they get leaner and leaner and leaner, maybe you want to go to 2 high carb days per week, or sometimes even 3 high carb days per week, to make sure that the stress accumulation that they're receiving from being in a constant calorie deficit and training really hard, you can mitigate that with maybe having 2 or 3 high carb days per week where they're not trying to burn that energy off. I don't want them burning that energy off. I want them charging their battery back up so we can go back into fat loss and keep seeing progress. So that would be number one. Make sure they're in an appropriate calorie deficit for them, but then also you have to plan for the future. Failure to plan for the future will result in failure to achieve a goal for your client. Thing number two is going to be make sure that they are resistance training in an appropriate manner where we have a myriad of different repetition ranges. Now, I believe that individuals that have body composition goals should be training anywhere from 8 to 10 reps, keeping things pretty heavy. And then you'd also want to be training in repetition ranges anywhere from 12s to 15s, 20s, sometimes even 30s. And I believe in not leaving any stone unturned when it comes to achieving a body composition that you desire, because there are things that you can essentially look for in strength gain that will cross over to allowing you to do more repetitions with lighter weight, which can have a hypertrophic stimulus. Now, 3 things you want to be mindful of when you're managing somebody's training programming is you want to make sure that there is some level of mechanical tension in the resistance training. So what I mean by that is the mechanical tension is keeping things between maybe 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, or even 10 repetitions. It's all the heavy stuff. And then you have the metabolic stress component, which is typically anything from 12 to maybe 15, sometimes even up to 20 reps. And then as a byproduct of the metabolic stress, you have cell swelling. So that would be thing number 2. And thing number 3 is to make sure that the individual that is in a fat loss phase is filling out some form of a biofeedback questionnaire. Here's what I mean by that. Oftentimes, we're putting people into calorie restrictive environments. We're just looking at what is their weight doing. And if the weight's going down, we think everything is fine. But if you're not actually asking them how they feel, how are your joints feeling? How's your sleep? If you're a woman, are you having any period issues? Has your period gone absent? How's your hunger levels? Questions or concerns? All those types of things are very important so that you can document the overall health and the internal health, the hormonal profile of the individual as they are losing body fat. So make sure that the client's filling out not only your tracker sheet, which is the macros, the fiber, the cardio, and their weight, but also make sure that they're filling out your biofeedback form so you can get a really good take on how they're actually managing the stress that you're putting them under to achieve that transformation. All right, and question number 5 coming to you guys is, how do you know when to adjust a client's nutrition? And also, what do you do if they plateau? So question number 1, how do you know when to adjust? Normally, you're going to know when to adjust a client's nutrition program when they begin to start to slow down. What I mean by that is the trend in whatever phase we're in. So we could be in a health phase, we could be in a body recomposition phase, or we could be in a fat loss phase. But as long as the client's healthy enough to go into a body recomposition or fat loss phase, ideally we're looking for those numbers to be slowly trending down in the right direction. What I mean by that is maybe you would have somebody at like 155 pounds. She's been tracking her macros, she's in a calorie deficit because you set those macros up, or I set those macros up for, and then we see a 154, and then a 3, and then a 2, and then a 1, and then a 50, and then the 49s. And as long as we're seeing a trend moving in the right direction, all is good. But if that trend begins to slow down and things become stagnant, this is normally where I will either, number 1, increase their calories to offload some of that stress that they've been accumulating, or number 2 is make a modest reduction in carbohydrate, maybe dropping them by anywhere between 60 and maybe 80 calories on the low carb days to see if that keeps the train moving in the right direction. Hopefully that helps answer your question on when I like to adjust a client's nutrition, but you also have to be mindful that some women should not be trying to go into a calorie deficit if maybe they're dealing with a high accumulation of stress or they have hormone imbalances or hormone dysfunction, in which I would recommend that we strongly focus on how they feel first, get them to where they feel great, they're living that health lifestyle, they're managing stress, and then they can go into a fat loss phase. Part number 2 of that is, what do you do if they plateau? I think I kind of already answered that, but basically you would want to mitigate the fat loss phase with some form of stress management. Now, what is stress management? We have to ask ourselves, what are the things that we can do to pull back on stressors, right? Think about calorie deficits as a stress. Think about the stress of overtraining, stressful. Think about the stress of lack of sleep, stressful, okay? All of those things are stressful. Now, God forbid something happens in your life, trauma, you're moving, lost your job, things, problems with the kids, problems with the husband, problem with the wife, whatever that is. All those things are stresses. So what we have to ask ourselves is, what can we do to manage those stressors? And normally it's always going to roll back on your lifestyle. So what I mean by that is, what are the things that you can do? Well, we can refeed the client, or we can provide them a diet break until they can make it through the stressful time. We can also reduce training frequency, we can reduce training volume, we can even reduce training intensity, but those are all things that we can reduce. We can also reduce cardiovascular exercise. So it's no surprise that in the fitness industry, a lot of people are addicted to chronic exercise. They want to do cardio an hour or more per day. They think going to cardio classes 2-3 times per day or working out 10 times per week is going to be the thing that helps them lower their stress. And unfortunately, that couldn't be further from the truth. Most of the time, when I see people that have these big plateaus or traumas happen in their life, I have to pull back all of these stressors and actually allow them to catch back up with life before I put that stress of a calorie deficit back on them. You also could consider some supplementation. Leaning on the coffee pot all the time is not going to be the thing that's going to help you the most. What I would recommend is actually taking a break from stimulants like coffee, energy drinks, and all those types of things, because truthfully, when we get stressed, we have a tendency to either overeat or overconsume caffeine, because we're tired and wired and we're trying to find a solution to that problem. But the solution to that problem is never typically doing more. It's actually going to be slowing down and learning from the experience that you're going through. One of the best ways to do that is to stop the dieting, stop doing too much cardio, and to stop resistance training where you can't recover from it. All right, question number 6, guys. We had a client come in that asked us about high cholesterol. This specific client was a guy, but he and his wife actually had high cholesterol, and they're telling me that their doctor wants to put him on a statin. Well, I said, well, have you tried a holistic approach first? Have we actually diagnosed what the problem is? Have we actually tried to implement some type of nutritional intervention to basically lower your cholesterol naturally? He said, no, we haven't. My physician didn't recommend that. And so what I said was, well, let's give it a couple of months and let's see if we can drop this thing naturally. The things you want to consider when you're dealing with high cholesterol, and how do we categorize high cholesterol? Number 1 is you would have high total cholesterol. So this would be anything 200 or greater. Next thing you want to consider is LDL cholesterol, and this would be anything that is 100 or greater. In the traditional Western medicine space, they would recommend you a statin to help basically regulate that cholesterol level. However, what I recommend is going more the holistic route. I recommend thinking about, what are the hormones that allow us to improve our metabolic rate? And if you've ever heard a video talk about metabolic adaptation, you know that during a fat loss phase or an aggressive diet, that T3, which is your thyroid hormone, will reduce. So what I like to try to do is make sure, can we take a look at the blood work? Can we analyze the individual's thyroid? Can we show whether or not this individual may be hypothyroid, or maybe they have a lot of reverse T3, which is the unusable thyroid hormone that you don't want? Because when reverse T3 is high, that tells me that there's a stress on the body, and we have to be able to lower that. Because ideally, reverse T3 and T3 cannot live in a mutually exclusive relationship, right? When reverse T3 is super high, usually T3 is low. And when T3 is good and healthy, normally reverse T3 is low. So what I like to try to do is stimulate the metabolism, actually crank their metabolism back up by making sure they're eating a lot of the right foods. What you'd want to think about first and foremost is, can we reduce or get away from all the nasty trans fats that you may be eating? Replace those with omega-3 fatty acids, fish oil, salmon, all those types of foods, avocados, all those types of foods. The other thing you'd want to do is remove excessive omega-6 fatty acids. So a lot of people maybe be in a position where they're just eating a bunch of chicken and a lot of protein sources that have a lot of omega-6, but they're not getting a lot of omega-3s. I'd highly recommend that as well. The other thing you'd want to consider is supporting the thyroid. So here's what I mean by that. We need to make sure we have a substantial amount of carbohydrates coming into the diet that allows us to stay insulin sensitive, but also allows us to maximize our metabolism. In doing that, you can then speed up your metabolism, you can improve your basal metabolic rate, you can get yourself back in a position where you can burn more calories. And by metabolizing things faster, guess what you also metabolize? You metabolize more cholesterol, and thus you can bring that cholesterol level down by anywhere between 10 and 30% of what it might be right now, simply by focusing on the food you put in your body and also maximizing your thyroid health. And question number 7 is, why is grazing throughout the day never going to satisfy your appetite? Now, I recently signed up a brand new client and she said, William, I'm hungry all day long and all I like to do is graze. I don't like to eat whole meals. And I said, well, what if I told you the reason you're hungry all day long is because you're never actually satisfying your appetite? So what I'd like to do is explain to you what happens when you constantly snack on carbohydrates all day, essentially leading you to a position where you're constantly spiking your insulin. So think about it like this. If I just go and I grab a handful of berries and maybe a carb bar or something, and then an hour later, those carbohydrates have metabolized, digested, and now I'm hungry again. It wasn't a substantial amount of calories to actually satisfy my body or your body. So what you would want to do is think about not just grabbing a carb or a fat or maybe even a protein, but what can we do to create the ideal meal where you're not going to be hungry for the next 3 or potentially even 4 hours. Ideally, you want to think about pairing all of the macronutrients together. You want a good quality fat source, you want a good quality carb source, good quality protein source, and a fiber. Okay. Now, if you eat all of those specific things in a meal, what's going to end up happening is you're going to stimulate a blood glucose release, a release of insulin, and then you're also going to maximize the muscle protein synthetic response, which is necessary for helping you build and recover your lean tissues. You want to allow that meal to drop in terms of blood sugar because we're going to get a spike. If your blood glucose insulin sensitivity at a fasted state is around 80, maybe 85, that meal's probably going to spike you up over 100, maybe even 110, 120, somewhere around there. And then you want to allow that to completely fall back down to you being insulin sensitive again. So however long that takes, and you'd only be able to note this if you were utilizing a blood glucometer. So what I'd strongly advise is we have to think about, well, am I a fast metabolizer or am I maybe a slower metabolizer? And it's going to take me longer to metabolize that meal. Nonetheless, most of my clients eat anywhere between 3 and 5 meals per day, and they do allow for at least 3 hours in between meals. So what I would encourage you to think about is get away from all the little bumps here, right? Grab a handful of strawberries, some blueberries, a banana, a carb bar, maybe a glass of orange juice. Get away from doing all of that and think about creating ideal meals that are going to help you satisfy all of your bodily needs. We have to remember that fat controls your cholesterol, your endocrine system, and your hormonal profile. Carbohydrates are essentially going to fuel your thyroid and give you more energy. Protein is going to help you build or maintain lean body mass, and then dietary fiber is necessary for helping you maintain and keep a clean, healthy gut microbiome. Now, if you spike that 3 or 4 times throughout the day with those meals that I mentioned, you would also want to potentially fast for about 10 to 12 hours per day. Now, I'm not telling you to intermittent fast. I don't mean that at all. But what I mean is have your 3 or 4 meals throughout the day, hit your macros, and then don't eat for maybe about an hour or 2 before bed. Obviously, you're not eating throughout the night. Wake up, start your day however you want, and eat within a window, maybe from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. or 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. or 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. as long as you make sure that you hit your macros, get all of your calories in, make sure you're consuming micronutrient-rich foods. That is the best tip that I can give you on how to manage your insulin. And as a case study, I have a client right now that's down about 30 pounds. She's actually a doctor of chiropractic over in Pinellas County. And when she came to me, she was always hungry, but she was kind of also just snacking throughout the day. In the first 2 weeks, her main complaint was, William, I'm hungry. William, I'm hungry. William, I'm hungry. But she was eating about 18 to 1900 calories per day. So I just said, hey, you have to have some patience. You got to calm down. We have to make sure that we're executing this plan of action, because what I can tell you is I took a look at your blood. Your insulin was over 20. We're trying to get your insulin levels back to normal, and this is the process that we have to endure. And after 2 weeks, sure as I called it, her insulin began to lower back down. Hunger was gone, and I'm very excited to be able to take a look at her blood work after she reaches her fat loss goal, which is another 15 pounds from where she is right now. Thank you so much for checking out this video. If you guys have any questions for me, please go ahead, leave them in the comment section down below, or hit me up on Instagram at William_Grazione, and we'll make sure we answer your question in the next Hey Coach video.